Hi, this is Steve, and I want to welcome you back to another episode of Tech Leader Talk. Would you like to learn how to create stability in your organization while the tech landscape is constantly changing? Well, today's guest, Stephen Shapiro, is going to share some insights and experiences about using pivotal strategies to strengthen your tech company. Stephen is a leading keynote speaker, author, and an advisor on innovation. He has 2 decades of practical innovation experience, including a 15-year tenure at Accenture, where he created and led a 20,000 person innovation practice. And Stephen just released a new book titled Pivotal: Creating Stability in an Uncertain World. And today he's going to be sharing some insights from his latest book and the motivation behind that book. He also talks about the importance of understanding your organization's unique strengths and leveraging them as differentiators. He suggests that you double down on what sets you and your company apart so you can create maximum impact and maximum value. During our conversation, Stephen also explains that pivoting is essential, but it's equally important to ensure a stable foundation. Excessive pivoting, just for the sake of pivoting, can lead to burnout, confusion, and lack of alignment within your organization. So I enjoyed this discussion with Stephen and got quite a few insights myself, and was excited to hear his background, his experience, and learn from all that he's done. So I think you'll enjoy it too. So let's get to the conversation with Stephen. Hi, Steve. Thanks for joining me on the podcast today.
Good to see you, Steve. Glad to be here.
Yep. So you have a lot of experience with innovation, and tell us a little bit, or tell the listeners and I a little bit about the path you took. How did you kind of get started with your interest in innovation and business, and then how has that journey continued to what you're doing today?
Yeah. So innovation wasn't something I planned to do. It was sort of thrust upon me in some respects. In the early 1990s, I was at Accenture for 15 years. And at that time, in 1993, I was one of the co-leaders of what was called business process reengineering. And it was our practice around optimizing business processes to make them more efficient. And I would go around at different companies and we'd optimize the company's processes. And I knew when we did that, they would downsize the workforce. And I knew the numbers sometimes were staggering. I mean, I went to one client and they announced that 10,000 people would lose their job as a result of the work that we were doing. And they were numbers though. I mean, it's like, okay, I know people are losing jobs, but it didn't really hit me till one day I'm working on this project. I go back to the hotel, I turn on the TV, and there was a news story about 3 executives at that client who lost their job a year before. And it really hit me hard. So the first person was living off an inheritance, didn't have a job, but still had enough money to survive. The second person cried the entire interview because he had to mow lawns to feed his family. And the third person committed suicide. And so I went back to the client the next morning and I said, I just saw this news story about people at your company. Was this true? I was told yes. And I walked off the project. I took a 6-month leave of absence. And I really started to think about what I wanted to do with my life. And I realized that I liked what I was doing. I liked helping companies, but instead of helping them shrink, I wanted to help them grow. And innovation back in 1995 wasn't much of a word. People weren't using it other than maybe R&D departments. But this is what I wanted to do, is help companies grow. And that's what I've been doing for coming up on 30 years now.
Interesting. Yeah, that's got to be a tough thing to see what happens with your client, or the results of you're out there trying to do good, but it backfires, or they're using it for a different reason.
Exactly.
So with your experience about innovation, it's today, as we've advanced from the 90s, innovation's popping up everywhere. Everybody talks about it. What's your, I don't know, definition, or what's your approach to innovation that's maybe a little different?
So a lot of people, when they hear the word innovation, if I asked 100 people, how do you define innovation? I'd probably get 200 different answers. And what I found is that a lot of people sort of collapse innovation and creativity together, and they aren't the same. Innovation, to me, And I'll give you my one-word definition of innovation. It is relevance. It is about an organization that creates something that is relevant to the market. It's relevant to their employees. It is relevant in a way that it creates as much value as possible. And how you do that is not through ideas and sitting around and coming up with, goofy brainstorming sessions, which tends to be the norm, but rather you get it by identifying what are the biggest opportunities, what are the most pressing problems that your customers have, what are the biggest pain points that if you could solve them in a way that no one else can, would have the greatest impact. And if you can do that, that's innovation. And it's not about novelty, it's not about being different necessarily, but it really is about solving pains that people have.
Interesting. So I've heard, like you said, probably more than 200 definitions of innovation, but that is a little bit different, and it's a lot more, I guess, practical, or just it's looking for business solutions and meeting a need, not just creating new things for the sake of creating, which is fine if that's what you want to do, but really looking at solving a real problem or filling a gap or a need. Interesting.
Exactly.
So you've written several books, some related to the topic of innovation, but you've got your new book coming out very shortly called Pivotal. What motivated you to write that book, and how does it kind of tie in with the other books that you've written previously?
So Pivotal wasn't a book that I planned to write, but it just sort of happened. And part of it was 2020 came, the pandemic hit, and pivoting was the word of the year. I mean, it was just like pivot. Hey, we can't deliver our food. Well, we got to pivot. We got to find you can't come to the restaurant. We'll deliver it. We'll find different clever ways. I mean, so it was a time when there was so much instability. And what has happened in the years since then is more instability, more uncertainty. And so when I would talk with my clients, it wasn't about creating something new. It was about knowing which direction to go. It was really difficult for them to decide, do we go this way? Do we go that way? What's going to happen next? And what I realized is we live in an unpredictable world. And even as we get more data, it actually seems to become more unpredictable. And so people would ask me, well, how do we predict the future? And my answer is always, you can't predict the future. We can't know what's going to happen. There's just way too many variables. What we can do is create stability in a world that's unpredictable and uncertain. And that's pretty much why I wrote this book, was I view it almost as the antidote to the perpetual pivoting that's been taking place in businesses, because it's just creating stress. It's burning people out. There's just so many statistics that tell us that it's not working. People don't like working. People are confused. And it's just a difficult time for a lot of people right now.
So what kind of generally, what kind of approaches can people take to create that stability, especially if our data is kind of all over the place and constantly changing?
Well, and I think that's the key word, Steve, is change. I love this quote, and I actually only discovered this quote after writing the book. So I stuck it in the preface of the book. And it's from a guy, I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but Jeff Bezos. I think a few people have heard of him.
I've recognized that name, yeah.
He's slightly famous. And I love this quote. He said, people outside of Amazon are always asking me, what's going to change in the next 5 to 10 years? But then he continued to say that I very rarely get asked what's not going to change in the next 5 to 10 years. That is the much more important question. He goes on to talk about why that allows you to be able to figure out where you're going to double down and create flywheels around those. And so that is, in essence, what this book is about. Is it's not about knowing what to change, but what not to change. Where do you double down? And I'll just give you a very quick visual here, a metaphor that I think might really help drive this home. So I've done some work with my local basketball team, the Orlando Magic, and basketball is actually a great metaphor for what we're talking about here. And if you think about a pivot in basketball, if you're not a basketball player, basically a pivot is one foot is on the ground and the other one's moving in circles. Now, if you think about most people, when they think about change, when they think about pivoting, they're thinking about this foot, the foot that's moving. But the reality is the pivot point is the one that's not moving. And we don't give enough emphasis on the foot that's not moving, the foot that gives stability, the foot that's not changing. We're so focused on what's next we never actually step back and ask ourselves, what's now? What do we focus on today that we can do that's going to pay dividends in the future? So that's really the essence of this book, is trying to figure out what's not going to change. Where do we double down that's going to have the greatest impact?
So a lot of that's a great visual to think about basketball and how you can pivot around one foot, but that foot that's staying planted that doesn't move. But I think from a business standpoint, that's kind of like the foundation, or it could be. It's like, what have you been doing? So the pandemic rolls around, and all these companies are trying to change everything. But if you've been in business for years, decades, you've got some foundation there, and you don't mess with that. Okay, the pandemic is, well, it went longer than I think we expected, and it's still not really done. But um, don't throw out years or decades of business to chase something that may not be long term. What what examples? So if you're a business, maybe if it was a tech company, and you're heading into, let's say, the next pandemic or the next completely unpredictable thing that's going to disrupt your business some, how do you kind of identify what are those stability points that you need to really latch onto and stay focused?
So the key, and I love the word that you're using there, it's that stable foundation, that solid foundation on which the rest of the business is built. I mean, we need to change, but if you are not changing on a solid foundation, then you're basically moving in quicksand. And what you're doing is you're throwing away all the things that made you great in an effort to change. And in the process, you lose your footing and you have no momentum in doing that. So the key is to create that solid foundation. And that solid foundation is typically made up of what I would call a differentiator. That's what we talk about in the book. But a differentiator is very different than what most people think a differentiator is. It's not about being different. It's not about being different for the sake of being different, but rather it is about something which is distinctive about your organization that would be difficult for others to replicate, that the market desires and creates value internally. And when you have those together, that gives you that solid foundation. That tells you where you should be doubling down. And so let's just talk for a moment about AI. You know, AI, everybody's chasing AI. It's the next bright, shiny object. And can we ignore AI? No, we need to worry about it. But at the same time, if it becomes our major thrust, if it becomes our major form of investment, and you are not an AI company, you are basically chasing the next situation, the next opportunity, as opposed to saying, how do we leverage AI? How do we find someone who has AI as their differentiator? How do we partner with someone who's masterful at AI, who can help us leverage it so that we can then focus on what we do best? And so any organization, no matter what industry you're in, you need to figure out what you do better than anyone else that creates the greatest amount of value that others won't be able to replicate. And if you focus your energies there, now you can figure out creative strategies, partnerships, automation, elimination, outsourcing, whatever it might be, for everything else that's not that. So it's really doubling down on where you're going to have the greatest impact.
Yeah.
And that is your differentiator.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. I was talking with a company that's primarily a manufacturing company a couple of weeks ago, and haven't really needed. They've got robotics and some of the automation stuff, but not at the AI level we're talking about today. And they're like, "Yeah, we got to hire in a whole team to do this and everything." I'm like, you have no experience. How do you know what's going to interface? Aren't there other companies that could come in, that, like you said, partnership with or team with? But no, it's like every business article is talking about AI, and it's going to affect every industry and every company. But yeah, there's different ways. You don't have to do it all in house. Interesting. What's in your book? I had the pleasure of getting an advanced copy. You talk about being pivotal. What do you mean by that?
So we sort of use the word pivotal because it's playing off of the word pivoting.
Mhm.
And pivotal, basically, it's dictionary definition, and I think it's probably a good one, is of crucial importance. So when you say this is a pivotal moment, it is a crucial
Yeah.
moment. If you say this is pivotal to our success, that means it is crucial to our success, as opposed to pivoting, which is about spinning around in circles. And again, the pivot point is the part that doesn't move. And that's where I think most people get it wrong, is being pivotal is focusing on the pivot point, not the foot that's moving.
Okay.
And so that's really how we came up with the term pivotal. We wanted something that was maybe a little clever and tongue in cheek. But the essence of it is how can you as an individual, as a team, as a department and as an organization become irreplaceable and indispensable to those you do business with. And I really try to focus not just on the organization level, but also how do you, Steve, how do you differentiate? What makes you pivotal to, if you're an employee, what makes you pivotal to your employer? What makes you pivotal to your team? What makes your team pivotal to the overall company? Mm-hmm. These are the types of questions you want to be asking yourself, because when you get that cascading approach where you've got a pivotal organization with pivotal departments and pivotal teams and pivotal individuals, it's a lot of pivoting, but when you get those words in there, that's really the key, is that alignment and having everybody understand, okay, this is how I am pivotal to the organization, and here's how what I offer aligns with what makes my team pivotal. And that alignment becomes really critical.
Okay. And then that would take into account your, using the basketball analogy, your pivot foot, as well as maybe what are some of the different opportunities? Where could you pass the ball? What's your next move? Keeping in mind kind of that foundation.
Exactly.
Right? Okay.
Exactly.
Interesting.
And let's face it, this is all a team sport. So, I mean, you're spot on. I mean, it's like, I need to be pivotal, but I know I need to know when I need to pass the ball to someone else. And when we can build teams where everybody's pivotal, not in the same way, but they're complementary aspects of being pivotal, now you have a very powerful team. Mm-hmm. And that is really so important, because if everybody's the same, then you don't get a pivotal team, because now we're going to be just getting one point of view.
Yeah.
And what makes you pivotal as an individual, in many cases, blends a lot of different perspectives that others won't have. For example, I like magic. I'm a magician in my spare time. I like music. I play the saxophone. How do these help me become pivotal in my work in innovation? Well, I use magic and I use music as ways of illustrating the power of innovation in ways that other people can't, because I actually have that experience.
That's interesting. I like that. And yeah, in a very different viewpoint, different perspective. So one of the things when you're discussing your book, you've mentioned that it's about creating stability in an uncertain world. So for the listeners who are, let's say, in a small or medium-sized tech company, how might that apply, or how might they implement something like that in their business activities?
So if you're a smaller organization, these concepts become even more important, because being pivotal is really about laser focus. And what happens is, in a lot of cases in organizations, we tend to dissipate our energies. Everything's an opportunity. Let's go here. And everything's a problem, whether it's a supply chain issue, inflation issue, labor talent issue. I mean, all these things, but these are in many cases universal challenges. And so what we need to do is ask ourselves, as a smaller organization, what's most important? And one of the frameworks that I use in the book, this is going to sound really simplistic, but it is probably the framework that I've developed over the years that's had the greatest impact with my clients. And I call it my innovation targeting matrix. And in its simplest form, I'll just give you the 10,000 foot view of it. Everything we do as individuals and organizations falls into one of three categories. And I want to be clear before I go any further that when I say this, a person is not one of these three categories. Every person in every organization will be doing work that's a combination of all three. The first category is work that's support. And support work is the work that supports the business. This does not create value for your customers, but we need to do it. Payroll would be an example of support. We need to pay employees, but if you work for a company and you decide, unless you're a payroll processing company, if you decide to invest in developing the world's best payroll system, you're wasting your time and money. Of course, you're going to outsource it to an ADP or someone else who does that type of work. Second category is core. Core is the work that creates customer value, but it's not the reason someone will do business with you. It's the reason why someone will not do business with you. If you get it wrong, they will leave. These are the table stakes. So this is not your competitive advantage. This is what is an expectation. So if you go to a hotel, you expect a clean room. You expect the internet to work. So investing in something that is that much better in those areas probably isn't going to make a difference. For anything that's core, you want to partner with others. You want to find ways of optimizing it, automating it, whatever it might be, but you don't want to invest heavily in it, and you don't want to do custom work. And then the highest level is innovation, is differentiation. That's where you want to innovate. And I always say innovate where you differentiate. So if you're a small organization, coming back to your question, innovate where you differentiate. Figure out what you as an individual, as a team, and as an organization do better than anyone else. And make sure you're investing almost all of your energies there. And anything that's not differentiating, anything that is support or core, use different strategies. I'll give you just a personal example. I'm a bit of a geek. I love technology. To me, goofing around with the latest technology, developing websites, these are things that I love to play around with. But for me to invest my time in developing a website on my own makes no sense, because clients don't value me because I have a great website. I have to have a great website. So I partner with someone who develops it for me. And that's just a great strategy. It's always to put front and center what's most important, what differentiates you, put your energies there, and then figure out other creative strategies for everything else.
Okay, good. That's good advice. What trying to think the best way to phrase this. You mentioned earlier that the companies that just go off pivoting without a plan and forgetting about their foundation, what got them to where they are. What problems do companies run into then if they don't do that? If they're pivoting too often?
If you're pivoting and you don't have a solid foundation, there are internal implications. So one of the things, when I ask my clients today, what is your biggest challenge? And it falls into almost always two categories. How do we adopt AI, and how do we keep our talent? Because the war for talent is stronger than ever right now in many areas. And so think about what pivoting consistently does to the organization. It creates burnout, creates confusion. People, when you're working, want to feel as though they're creating something of value, that they're doing something worthwhile. And if every time you take 3 steps forward, you have to take 2 steps back, if you're going right one day and you're going left the next day, it's crazy making. And so you burn out the workforce. People are not happy with what they're doing. And then as an organization, you don't get alignment. So you don't get anything of true value. You dissipate your energies. So when you can get laser focused, not only does the organization produce better results that are targeted specifically at the right customer segments, but the people inside the organization feel as though they are pivotal, that they're creating value. And that, to me, is at the end of the day, really what matters most. Because when you have a pivotal organization, you will then create value because you have everybody sort of moving in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I experienced something like that. I was a contractor to a company for quite a few years, a very large tech company. And for a period of time, a couple of years, they got into this mode where every employee, at least within the group I was working in, had to move to a completely different role every 6 months. So, and it's some heavy duty tech, it can take you 6 to 12 months just to get up to speed. So they're just getting up to speed, and then they get ripped out of that position, do something else, and they kind of start the learning process. They kind of realized after a while that wasn't working because productivity or the results weren't coming out. But I know some of the people I would work with, they were so frustrated, and a lot of them left because they couldn't handle that environment. So
yeah, and look, job rotation can be a good thing because it gives you a new perspective, but too much change too often that doesn't serve a real purpose, you're just wasting people's time. And so I can imagine, especially if the technology was that complicated that it takes that long to come up to speed, by the time you're hitting your stride, you're moved into a new role. Well, that's exactly what's happening without changing people's positions. It's like one day, hey, go do this. And then the next day, well, you were doing that, but now I need you to go do this. And there are so many studies done that have shown just the level of burnout. Like only 8% of organizations say that they have plenty of capacity to change. Like they just are able to, whatever change comes their way, they're able to. That's 8%. And if you look at the employees, like close to 50% of the employees say that they don't understand the changes that they're being asked to make. And in many cases, when they do understand the change, they don't agree with it. So now, not only are you confusing people, but you're annoying people. It's just an endless, frustrating cycle. And so what I'm really trying to do is bring some stability and sanity back into the workplace, where we can get crystal clear, laser focused on what matters most. And then everybody knows what they need to do. And you can actually step back a little bit, give people some freedom to do what they know how to do,
Yeah.
what they do better than anyone else, as opposed to having to micromanage all the time.
Well, and if you are somebody, if they're changing the priorities every day, if every morning you come into work and something different, or even every Monday, there's not much long-term thinking going on. It's almost like you're putting out fires or just dealing with whatever this week's priorities are, because they're all going to get tossed next week anyways. So
Exactly.
that would be
Exactly.
frustrating.
Yes,
What
indeed.
what so if a company is looking at this and they kind of identify kind of what's their foundation or their pivot part, and they've got a whole bunch, they've got AI and a couple dozen other things they could be chasing as something new or an advancement. How do they prioritize those and then maybe put them into one of those different buckets as to whether we do this, we partner with somebody else, or completely outsource?
Yeah, so let's talk about the core level for a moment, because
Mhm.
support, I think everybody sort of
Yeah.
intuitively gets. We're not going to put a massive amount of energy into that. So the first thing is to really distinguish what's core, what's differentiating. That's the first step. And again, this happens at the organization level, the department level, the team level, the individual level. And again, I want to reiterate, there are no support functions. HR is not a support function. They do support work, they do core work, they do differentiating work. Every person, every department does a combination of all three. So that's, I guess,
Mhm.
the first thing is just to get crystal clear on that. And then from there, what you need to do is, again, just sort of figure out if something is core, then what you want to do is ask yourself, how can I simplify this? How can I automate it? How can I use, partners? An example I really love is a company I did an event for. It's called CCC. If you get into a car accident and you go to an automotive repair shop, there's probably a 70 to 80% chance that the repair center that is doing the repairs on your car is using CCC to process the claim. It's because all the major insurance companies said claims processing software is not our differentiator. Let's find a partner. And so, like State Farm a couple of years ago said, basically, if an automotive repair center is not using CCC, you will not get paid by State Farm. So
Hmm.
that to me is like a great example of understanding what is core and what is differentiating. And here's the really cool thing. You didn't ask this, but I just want to say this real quickly, which is if you get clear on what makes you differentiating, and you sit down with, especially in a B2B environment, if your customers are businesses, and you understand what makes your clients or customers differentiating, now what you do is you look at what's only core and support for them. If you can do those things, you're helping your customer really accelerate. So CCC says, okay, claims processing, that's not differentiating the State Farm. We can take it off of your plate because it's differentiating for us. We do it better than anyone else. And just using that simple concept has really helped companies laser focus what they can do to create the greatest value for their customers. Because once a customer understands this is how we differentiate as a customer, and this is what's only core for us, if you can take those core things off of our plate, that's going to be really incredibly powerful.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a smart approach. I like that.
And it works. It's a great conversation starter. Instead of saying, what do you need? You ask you if you can help your client, if you can help your customer understand what makes them special, what differentiates them, and then you look at everything else that they do, those are opportunities that if you can take it off their plate, they're going to be paying top dollar to not have to think about it.
Yeah.
So it's a great way to get a good conversation going. And I said earlier, innovate where you differentiate, but you also want to sell where you differentiate. Don't sell what's core. Don't sell what you do that's expected, but only focus your energies on what makes you special, and then focus again on your clients and customers and what makes them special. And if
Yeah.
you can get that alignment, that's perfect.
Okay. All right. So you're involved in a lot of activities. You've got your clients, the Orlando Magic, and written quite a few books. But today, what's the favorite part of the work that you do?
I had an epiphany just recently that, and so here I am, I'm writing a book on Pivotal, which is really about, instead of trying to figure out what's next, what do you do great that you should double down on? And I realized I developed something 20 years ago that I never fully leveraged. It's the thing which I enjoy doing the most. It is the thing which I think makes the greatest impact very quickly because it's fun. And actually, I have some cards here. I mean, basically, it is a card game called Personality Poker. And basically, this is a card game that helps people understand how they contribute to innovation, how they contribute to their team. But more importantly, it helps them understand where they're going to be a distraction, what instead of focusing on what makes us great, what is also a blind spot of ours, and how can we then partner with others? So it's a great collaboration tool. And I just realized it's so much fun. And I've used it, but I've never really leveraged it fully. So I'm going back to something I developed 20 years ago and really investing heavily in that because the market keeps on telling me they love it. So I better do more with it.
It's interesting. Is it going to be card only, or is it going to be an online or a virtual, since we're also distributed?
So there is a virtual version of it already. We
Oh,
developed
okay.
that a long time ago. It's called Personality Poker Game, personalitypokergame.com. And it basically looks like a Las Vegas slot machine with spinning wheels, and you get 5 cards, and you choose the 5 cards where the words best describe how you see yourself. And it will give you a readout of how you contribute to innovation, how you detract from innovation, who you need to collaborate with. So that's been there. But what I'm really looking at now is almost like moving beyond the individual and team to systems. So taking that concept of, well, how do we have an entire organization go through this process
Yeah.
and be able to map where everybody is organizationally so we can see where we're weak in terms of certain capabilities that exist. So it's in the early stages of development, but I think that'll be pretty fun when we take it to the next level.
Yeah, especially with the focus on innovation, that could be huge for tech companies. To how do we get our team, rather than just constant pizza lunches and brainstorming sessions?
Yeah, exactly.
What others, kind of like the strengths finder, but with a little bit more of a focus on innovation. Interesting.
And with poker cards, how often do you go to a meeting and you're there and people are trading cards and
Yeah.
getting on their hands and knees and gifting cards? I mean, the great thing is, I can have a card and I can say, hey, you know what, Steve, I think this is you. And I give you the card and say, well, when we work together, this is what you did. And this is why I think you are, in that case, astute was the card. So it's a great way to build a team dynamic
Yeah.
and have everybody very quickly not just understand who they are, but also how we're perceived by others. How do we work better with others? And again, it's all done with poker cards. So it's a heck of a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, it's experiential, so, and it's physical, it's tangible. And yeah, interesting. I'll keep watching. I was already familiar with the product. I hadn't actually had a chance to use it, but I will look into that some more, because I've got some clients that I'm sure that could help them.
Yeah, and try the online version. It's fun and free.
Okay, I will do that, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes. So if any of the listeners
Great.
want to check it out, they can do that. So what's ahead for you and your team for the rest of this year and into next year, besides the book launch?
Yeah, so the book launch is a big part of it. Relaunching, I guess you could say, Personality Poker is part of it.
Mhm.
And then in the middle of all that, I'm planning to launch a new academy. So I've always had, if you want to work with me, basically you can buy a $20 book, or you can hire me to do a speech, which is not cheap, or you can hire me for my mastery program, which is even more expensive. And so what I'm creating in the middle of all that is an academy, which is something where people can learn the process of being pivotal and differentiating, learn all the different tools from my Invisible Solutions book. And so that's really the next thing, is how do I take everything I've done for 25 years, bundle it up into an online environment which people can consume at the pace they want, with cohorts and group learning and things of that nature. And that's really I think one of the next big things I want to focus on.
Okay, well, that sounds valuable. I'll be keeping watch for that, and um, looking forward to seeing the final version of the book when it gets published. What As an author, I'm going to make the assumption that you probably enjoy reading also, as I do. What's a favorite book you've read or listened to recently? Fiction or nonfiction? Your choice.
Yeah. I mean, I read a lot of fiction, mainly mysteries, because I think of mysteries, magic, and innovation as being sort of related cousins. You're still solving problems. You're making the impossible possible. You're trying to figure out how someone did it. I think
Yeah.
that's really cool. But as far as business books, one which I read that I liked, it actually relates to the question you just asked in terms of what's next, is a book by Russell Brunson called Lynchpin. Now, I know that Seth Godin has a book by a similar title, maybe the same title, but Russell Brunson's book is called Lynchpin. And what I like about it is, first of all, I don't think you can buy it on Amazon. You can only buy it directly from him. And he models the process of creating a direct marketing campaign where instead of just getting a book and a few digital items, you also get a subscription to something. And so I like the model, and it's something which I plan on using with my academy. But I also like the title, because when you think about linchpin and pivotal, they're almost like, in some respects, the same thing. A linchpin is the thing which attaches to give you stability.
Yeah,
Well,
right.
the pivot point is what makes you pivotal, because it attaches to prevent something from moving. So I just sort of like that little play on words there also.
Okay. I'm familiar with Russell Brunson. I've read one or two of his other books. Haven't heard about the one called Lynchpin. I have heard of the other author's version.
Yeah.
I'll add
And
that
he's,
one
just for
to my
people who
list.
don't know him, he's the guy who developed ClickFunnels. So that's really one of the things he's known for, is
Yeah.
sort of his the funnel technology. And although I don't necessarily use the funnels the way he describes them, the general philosophy of how you create a community is pretty powerful.
Okay. Well, I will add that one to my list, and I'll put a link in the show notes so the listeners can find that easily if they're interested. So I appreciate your time. This has been a fantastic interview. I always love talking with you. I learn something every time. And the book is great. And I encourage readers to get a copy of that. We'll get a link in the show notes, because it will be either released or very close by the time this becomes public. If listeners have questions or they want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to reach out?
And just go to my website, steveshapiro.com. I mean, that's the easiest way to find me.
Okay.
And just drop me a note, say hi. Always love to hear from people. If you enjoyed this, let me know. Would love to hear from you.
Okay. All right. And I'll get a link, the website link, in the show notes. So everything will be there for people. So I know you're busy. I appreciate you taking the time today and share your knowledge, and wish you best of luck on a fantastic book launch.
Great. Well, thank you, Steve. Really appreciate your time. Thank you, everyone, for watching this. And hopefully I'll have a chance to see you in person sometime soon, Steve.
Yes.
Take care.
Thanks.